Reeve, R-E-E-V-E.
Okay. That sounds familiar.
Also known as the Reverend, or better known as the River End. And they were in business for taking and making corporations of the poor. They wanted to give their children a better future. And this is when the Black history that we know was implemented.
It's true.
And they tried to get rid of the white slave trade. Okay. But they had to push it off onto another group of people. When someone has a fever, right? If they have a high fever, the body shuts down.
That's
it
true.
does a reset. And what happens afterwards is sleep.
Yeah.
But when you're asleep, you can forget things or you can be reminded. So the whole point was to try to put everybody to sleep and make those whose history they were really talking about, they want them to forget it, but they want to remind it to another group of people.
Oh, so move it to another set group of people.
They want
I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's all right to disobey the 10 commandments, but just don't disobey the 11. Thou shalt not get caught. That's the attitude.
Oseo, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about one of the most famous clips by Martin Luther King Jr. that's online today, and how it reveals the truth about the civil rights movement and the hidden agenda behind it. This particular Martin Luther King Jr. video has a lot that's hidden from the public, and his involvement with the civil rights movement plays a major part when it comes to Black history, not just for those who consider themselves as Black, but for poor people in general. And to understand this, we must first understand civil rights. Civil rights deals with who will take financial ownership over a thing. This is important for Martin Luther King Jr. and for reverends in particular, because for hundreds of years prior, it was the reverend who took financial ownership over people's actions and finances through a certain aspect of technology. Technology is the knowledge that we use to achieve industrial or commercial objectives. It's how we communicate with each other, from the words technique and logos, and a technological device is just the instrument that is used for communication, like for instance, a book. And so this made the Reverend the first alpha, because if he or she was able to read and translate what was inside of the book, they were looked to as the mediator. But every time there is a change in technology, a new alpha can emerge. And this causes certain groups of people, including the Reverend, to have a temper tantrum. And what is a temper tantrum? A movement. Because a movement is an emotional response, which in turn creates a physical response. For those who had control over the poor people's mindsets, they felt that they were losing their grip. Because when it comes to holding people's attention and giving them direction, the TV and the radio are far more powerful than the book. That also means that slaves will now have to submit voluntarily to their enslaver. But the Reverends had a plan, and it was called integration, to integrate those who were already dead and to entice those people into voluntary enslavement. To help with this situation, they asked for the vote. And this just means let the people decide whether they want to be enslaved or not. So hold on, let me play this clip
And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can. And seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps. But it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
So notice how he says it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself up by his own bootstraps. When asked a question, he doesn't answer the question in particular, but he makes the statement alleging that the Negro is already dead. Because what is a bootless man? In the military, when a soldier dies, what do they do with his boots? And how does the morgue get the toe tag on? Exactly. So, how does Martin Luther King Jr. get a living man to just give up and die?
The Negro cannot solve the problem by himself.
And many times, hearing that type of thing, especially when it comes to a child, it removes their hope if they aren't strong enough. In this speech in particular, titled "The Other America," he states,
The Negro cannot solve the problem by himself. There again, there are those who always say to Negroes, why don't you do something for yourself? Why don't you lift yourselves by your own bootstraps? And we hear this over and over again.
You hear it? He's saying that the Negro cannot solve the problem by himself. When he states the words, massive action program.
The job ahead must be massive and positive. We must develop massive action programs all over the United States of America in order to deal with the problems that I have mentioned. Now, in order to develop these massive action programs, we've got to get rid of one or two false notions that continue to exist in our society. Now, there's another thing that I'd like to mention as I talk about the massive action program, and time will not permit me to go into specific programmatic action to any great degree. But it must be realized now that the Negro cannot solve the problem by himself.
Martin Luther King Jr. was actually known for repeating this statement multiple times. This is classic hypnotization, especially within this audio, as the commands were in the words, "It must be realized," and the words, "there again," and the words, "we hear this over and over." So every time they hear the words, "Why don't you lift yourself up?" the automatic response would have been what followed, the fact that the Negro cannot solve the problem himself. But listen to this.
A man was on the plane with me some weeks ago, and he came and talked with me, and he said, the problem, Dr. King, that I see with what you all are doing is that every time I see you and other Negroes, you are protesting, and you aren't doing anything for yourself. He went on to tell me that he was very poor at one time and he was able to make it by doing something for himself. Why don't you teach your people, he said, to lift themselves by their own bootstraps? And then he went on to say other groups face disadvantages.
Isn't this the question that's asked by the interviewer on the video that I showed at the beginning? So how was it that the interviewer and the man that was on the plane asked the same question? So the truth is, he's creating a mental image using particular words where he enforces the statement that he doesn't want you to lift yourself up. He wants you to stay reliant. And this reliance can be on the church or a reliance on the government. And this is in 1967. In 1955, when he was still getting started, one of the first things he asked for was the ballot.
So our most urgent request to the President of the United States and every member of Congress is to give us the right to vote, give us the ballot, and we will no longer have to worry the federal government about our basic rights. Give us the ballot.
This is before the March on Selma, before the Million Man March in Washington, before SNCC and Black Power. He asked for the ballot because it's in the vote. The vote is the secret contract that signs a slave into bondage voluntarily. And that should reveal that they weren't begging for the ballot, they were begging for the bailout, for the interest of financial accumulation that they created over the years with their management of the slave. And I say this because an urn, which is a vessel for ashes of the dead, was also historically used as a ballot box. I'm just here to make you think.